Right now, and for the last probably year or two, double threshold's been everywhere. Lactate numbers, 4.0 millimoles. This is the best way to train in the world. But most runners copying it don't understand why it works, what it's actually controlling, or who it's meant for. And that's why most either stagnate, get hurt, or run threshold training just into another version of gray zone training. And so in this video, I wanted to take a moment to break down the Norwegian model, where it comes from, its origin, the workouts the structure has, and how to apply the principles without wrecking your training. So if you want to understand this properly, not just copy it, stay with me. For those of you new to my channel, I'm Brant Stachel. I'm the most reviewed coach on Team Run Run. I have almost 110 5-star reviews. I've coached over 200 athletes in the last 4 years to Boston qualifiers, and I've helped over 25 athletes represent Canada internationally, and I work with Olympians and professional athletes on the mental and physical side of performance. So before we get into it, I wanted to talk about when I was first introduced to double threshold training. So that would have been the summer fall of 2019. And the running world was a very different place then, pre-COVID. We didn't really have super shoes. We kind of did, but it was a very different world. And so the Ingebrigtsen brothers were just beginning their global takeover. And for most people in North America, the Norwegian model was this mysterious phrase we heard like from high-level runners or other camps. And then it was starting to trickle out in the Ingebrigtsen's YouTube series. And so I remember working with one of my university team members at that time in Canadian Elite, Karen Lum, and we started implementing the double threshold system. We were on one of the most beautiful places, Spanish Banks in Vancouver, at the time preparing for his cross-country season where he inevitably became national champion. And rather than approaching with just simply all the high-intensity burner sessions that we traditionally do in North America and Europe, we started dialing in on some of the double threshold work. And what we did with that was we bought a lactate meter, we talked to some of the physiologists in the labs at Canadian Sport Institute and at our university. And so we were literally, I was on a bike in between every rep, I was pricking his fingers, and we were getting the very specific number and reading it, and we were adjusting in between. I remember thinking at the time, like, man, this is some like mad scientist, like crazy thing, right? There were certainly, sometimes where we thought, is this working? Is it enough? Because it was very different than what we were doing. But when we thought it through and we learned more, we figured out that this is probably the way to go. This is something that needs to be implemented at high level training. And we were fortunate enough that it paid off. It worked very well. He ended up becoming national champion. And that winter, 3 months later, he became the national U23 record holder in the 3000 running 745. And so when I first started looking at this, I wasn't just like guessing. I was applying the early blueprints laid, and I'm going to butcher the name, so I apologize, Dr. Marius Bakken. He posted this paper in 2002, and it only started catching on, I would say, when the Norwegian method, or the Ingebrigtsen method, as some people call it, really caught on, and that's when I found the paper. If you fast forward today, everybody from high schoolers to master's runners are taking double threshold and applying it to the training. But the problem is most people are still training like it's 2019 and not understanding the full utilization or how best to implement it. What I find is interesting is that Dr. Bakken actually probably noticed this, and in late 2025 came out with a second opinion piece, and he officially revisited his original papers. And so he updated some of the science to a little bit more modern, clarified some of the misconceptions he was seeing, and revealed the missing links regarding muscular tone and individual lactate curves, and went in a little bit further to the origins of where he found it, lactate flux. I've used this paper, both the 2002 paper and the 2025 paper, to implement some of the training I've done with elites like Thomas Nobbs, who you can see this in our training series. You can see where we implemented that in his last marathon build before he ran 212. My wife, Elena, who's gone on to run 246 in 35 minutes in the 10K. And I'm still using that as well with some of my age groupers and masters runners as we've developed this model. And so first, to understand the 2025 update, we've got to understand the man who started it all. And so Dr. Bakken wasn't just a coach. He was a 1306 5,000 meter runner and a medical doctor in the late 90s. Like, to put in perspective, 1306 in the late 90s was incredible. He went to Kenya to live and train with the world's best at the time. And he expected to find this superhuman speed, these really hard workouts. Instead, he found extreme intensity discipline. So the secret that he noticed was that Kenyans did massive volume, but their fartlek sessions were never all out. They stayed right on this edge. When he returned back to Norway, he turned himself into a human laboratory. He tested his blood multiple times a day for years and really tried to hone in on what was working. And so in his original 2002 paper, he laid out the standard model: high volume, double threshold, days on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and what he described as an X, or later the Ingebrigtsens described as an X session, which was a hill session on Saturdays. The rule of 4.0 became law. So you want to stay under 4.0 millimeters and you can recover faster. Versus now in the shift, Bakken admitted that the standard model was being oversimplified. And there's 3 pillars in 2025 that I think are important for all of us who have maybe seen the hype or implemented it that we should know so we can focus on. So the first being individual deflections. Bakken now argues that 4.0 is just a crude number. And so each athlete is going to have their own kind of inflection point where the curve changes. When we're doing that with athletes now, we need a mass amount of data to understand where their inflection is to really fine tune it. The second factor is the muscular tonus factor. In 2025, focus shifted from just the metabolic stress to mechanical stress. Early on in the 2002 paper and in his own training, Bakken found that splitting the sessions, or the double part of double threshold, keeps the muscles primed. Versus if you do one massive 15K session, your muscle fibers fatigue and your form breaks down. So the double is, in part seen as a mechanical reset. The third piece was understand summer heat training shows that lactate readings in 30 degrees Celsius are totally different than 10 degrees Celsius. So if you don't adjust your targets for the weather, you're probably overtraining. And when you look at this on the elite level, going into championship season, this is where you can see a lot of the athletes kind of going through a boom or bust cycle, depending on if they're adapting properly. Okay, so that's a bit of the history of the broad level understanding. But I imagine most of you are here to understand the workouts and the practical toolbox. I'll give you some. If you want to see how we've used them in marathon builds, I'll link to the Thomas Knobs series in the show notes. You can see how we've used that. If you're taking notes and you want to understand more, you want to implement it into your training, this section's probably for you. This is the standard Norwegian block we look at these days. So Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Tuesday is like the volume double. So you have an AM session, which you can look at as an aerobic primer. One of the staple workouts might be 5 times 2,000 or 6 times a mile. The goal is 2.2 to 2.5 millimoles. The rest, 2 minutes. One of the tricky things I see with athletes here is they implement the double threshold training without the lactate monitoring. And why this is tricky is because for most of us, especially here in North America, we aren't properly in tune to what threshold is. Most people overrun their thresholds. They're faster on their thresholds. And what ends up happening is they press these sessions. And so I would recommend at first, if you are doing this, to do a lactate monitor and actually test, and or knock off the pace a little bit, because for most of us, I'm going to just have this as a prior, that most people are running too fast, so we should back off. And so just as a clear primer before we go through the rest of the workout. So these aerobic primer workouts, the AM sessions on the Tuesday, the 5 by 2,000 meters or the 6 by a mile, we want long sustained reps. This builds the durability of the heart, the muscular system, the aerobic system. I've done these for years. I love doing them. The athletes that I've done this with love this type of session. It feels like they're getting in, they're getting warmed up, and they've noted that for their PM session, they feel much better having that longer session done in the morning. So if we look at the atypical PM session for the Tuesday, you can look at it as what Bakken would describe almost as a metabolic flush. And so that workout might be 10 to 12 times 1,000 meters. So you're going a little bit higher, right, on the lactate, so 3.0 to 3.5, and 60 seconds recovery. You can think of it this way. The morning session opened the valves, so to speak. I know that's not exactly correct physiologically, so don't hate on me, but it's the idea of opening the valves. Evening session can be slightly faster. So we want the blood to flux throughout the system, to use Bakken's language. Thursday would be the speed threshold doubles. AM is a little bit more of a sustained effort, so you're looking at a typical would be 3 by 3,000 meters. So 2.5 millimoles being the goal, and this is about time at the edge. So 3,000 meter reps are mentally tough, and they teach the body to clear lactate over a longer duration. Versus in the PM, you can think of it almost as like a neuromuscular snap, getting a little bit quicker. 20 to 25 times 400 meters, 3.5 to 3.8 millimoles on a rest of 30 to 45 seconds. These are fast, but because they're short, 60 to 70 seconds, the lactate doesn't have the time to, spike. And so this is where we build 1,500 meter and 3,000 meter specific speed. It's a part of it, not the entire piece. That's a big training system that we use for athletes to build late stage closing and work on their lactate clearing. Saturday is the X element, as it's been described mostly by the Ingebrigtsens. And so this workout for them traditionally is 20 times 200 meter hill sprints, or 2 times 10 times 200 on the track. The goal here is very high intensity. In Bakken's 2025 update, he talked about why this was important. He said it was very clear that if you only do threshold, you become a diesel engine. And so you lose your pop, that speed, that quickness. He treats Saturday and updated his system to talk about Saturday as the ability to remind the nervous system how to fire rapidly. And so this is the session that the Ingebrigtsens almost never skip. Now, I want to take a moment. I just gave you workouts that have been used at the pro level, but I want to have a caveat here. These workouts, when they're listed in distance, are very different for you and I and the pros. 3 by 3,000 meters for an elite athlete is under 9 minutes for most of them. You and I aren't doing 3,000 meters in 9 minutes for most of us at tempo or threshold pace. I like to actually convert these to time. And so as a general rule of thumb, I kind of just look at the kilometers as 3 minutes and convert that out. workouts. So if you're looking at a workout of 5 by 2000 as an example, I would look at that and go 5 by 6 minutes. That's still a pretty good workout. And when you look at these lactate numbers, that tends to correspond a little bit closer to marathon effort than tempo effort if you're using the Daniels system. The one thing I would highly recommend for runners who aren't at the sub-elite or elite level is we convert these to time so it becomes a realistic work amount. Because if you don't, and you're trying to do, say, 5 times 2,000 meters, and it's 8 minutes, that's a vastly different workout, and it's more time for lactate to spike. So as a general kind of rule for general pop, I would convert everything you see, assuming a kilometer is roughly 3 minutes. That's going to give you roughly the same time workload as you would be seeing in some of these elite runners. Further to that caveat, I wanted to discuss some of what I see as like barriers to entry or modifications. I get emails from athletes looking to work with me who are doing, 20, 30 miles a week and asking how to start double thresholds because they've seen it. And my answer, I don't put it as bluntly as this, but is don't. So I think there's a couple requisites that people miss. Volume, your total weekly volume that you can consistently handle needs to be higher to implement this. I think it's roughly 70 to 80 miles per week, or I like to do it in time, probably 70 to 90 minutes a day for at least 6 months. If you don't have that base, the second session of the double day will just cause probably a stress fracture or more injury. The second one, and I get that it's inhibitive, is the meter. If you aren't pricking your finger, you aren't truly, in the truest essence, doing the Norwegian model. The Norwegian model is often called the lactate informed model. So you're just guessing. Heart rate is affected by caffeine, sleep, stress. Lactate is the only ground truth. That's not to say that you can't do this method without pricking yourself every rep. But I think what most of us have to do, as I said earlier, is tone the pace and the effort down because we tend to go too fast on these. Again, remember, I said off the top, this is an exercise in intensity control and discipline. If you don't have that, this system is not going to work for you. In the 2025 paper, Bakken had more of an applied model that you could do out in the field. And so for those of you who maybe aren't hitting some of the requisites, the higher mileage weeks, or have the lactate monitor, he called it the 45-15 hack. He offered it as a gift, I believe. It might have been translated to gift, but it's 45 seconds at threshold pace or effort, 15 seconds of easy jogging, and you repeat that for 30 to 45 minutes. He notes that he believes that it's a simple session that mimics the double effect. The short rest keeps the heart rate pinned, but the 15 seconds allows the muscular tension to reset. His words, not mine. I've used this with developing athletes to bridge the gap, or return to run athletes who are starting to get back into workouts who can't really go to full-on tempo sessions or the double thresholds. I've used this system for a handful of years. I think there's great benefits to it. I think there are drawbacks to it. I don't think everybody does well with it. I think the people who will do well with this have really good intensity control and don't mind kind of bucking the trend of going fast, showing fast on workouts. The people who tend to do this actually tend to listen to their body more, understand the actual threshold of what they're working on, the purpose of the workout, and they don't just copy it straight up. So for coaches and athletes listening, there needs to be a little bit of individualization for this, and we don't want to stick to hard and fast pace spectrums. The other thing I see people do that when you truly do the Norwegian system changes how you operate is if you're not lactate monitoring, you assume that your pace is X for tempo, and so no matter what, you just do that pace. In the true Norwegian system, or the system that Bakken put forward that we're talking about, that's been nicknamed the Norwegian system or the Ingebrigtsen system, their paces change even intra workout based on the lactate reading that they get. And so we as athletes who aren't pricking ourselves, let's say, also need to change in rep based on how we're feeling. So we got to go back to that RPE scale that I've discussed in a bunch of my training videos, which I'll link below. And so it's important to remember that just simply doing the workouts as printed, or as the Norwegian system elicits that they do this on Tuesday, this on Thursday, this on Saturday, isn't exactly the way to get better. It's like you're following a philosophy, but you're not really doing it. If the belief is that you're staying at this pace, you're probably not doing it right. Another key piece that goes along with what I'm trying to say here is that in the 2025 update, Bakken reminds us that we are all an N of 1 experiments. This is what coaches do really well when they're looking at the data and they're communicating with athletes. We have to find their own curve if we're doing that from a lactate informed perspective, or their own pathway and reference point for RP if we're not. And so we have to respect each individual athlete, and that goes for you as well as the listener. You have to respect who you are as an athlete, your training environment, the wind, the heat, the altitude that you have. And you have to have the intestinal fortitude, so to speak, to stay slow even when your ego wants to go fast. I hope this video helped break it down a little bit. If you want to see some of the workouts in real life that I've actually done with athletes, you can check out the Thomas Knob series. We broke down every week of his marathon build on route to 212 at the Marathon Project. You can see how he's implemented these in real life, how we've shifted some of his workouts and his easy runs to help him move from 219 to 212 and really get a sense for how that works in real life. The Norwegian Method might be top of mind. It might be one of the hot things that everybody's doing. This past year in 2025, I spent 3 months in Flagstaff talking to pros, watching pros, seeing what they were doing. And certainly everybody is doing it. I coached a couple of high schoolers who they were doing it. And I've coached ex-collegiate athletes who they were doing it. And I think as a system, it's probably really great. It's probably one of the 3 or 4 things that's really driving performance right now since like 2022 and on. But I do think there's a better way to do it. And I think what happens for most of us is we see what elites are doing and we try to copy it down for us. Hope this video gave you a little bit more context in terms of why we do it, how to implement it, and understand that it is a philosophy, not an exact copy and paste. If you implement it as appropriate for you, you're likely to get the benefits, provided you've met the initial caveats or the buy-in, so to speak, to get into it. If you have questions, drop them in the comments. I'd love to answer them. If this video has been informative to you, please subscribe. I have videos like this breaking down every type of training pace. I continue to do videos breaking down and doing some deeper dives on training and what it's like to get better. So thanks for listening.